Hello and welcome to the Becoming Your Highest Self podcast. I'm your host, Macy Renee, and we are going on a journey together, my friend. If you've been looking for a podcast geared towards your growth, self-awareness, navigating your brain's daily mind drama, and deep inner work to become your highest and best self, you are in the perfect place. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to Becoming Your Highest Self podcast. If you're a returning listener, welcome back. And if you're a brand new listener here, I'm Macy and I'm so excited to have you here. So with that being said, I also wanted to just ask you guys that if you are a returning listener and if you find yourself loving the podcast and coming back to this podcast because you get valuable content from it and it is in some way maybe shaping your life or helping to transform your life, or there's a specific episode you love and you're an iTunes listener, I would so appreciate it if you would go leave a written review. I would really love that, a rating and a review if you're loving the podcast, and just share something that you love about it or your favorite episode or something that you've learned. Each time someone leaves a review, it helps bump up the podcast and it helps it become more visible also for others to find me. So I really do appreciate you leaving the reviews, especially because podcasters, for a lot of us, we do this for zero money. We don't get paid to do this. At least I don't. So it's just our time and wanting to give value to the world with what we have to offer. So leaving in a review is just a very awesome thing and makes me feel really good to go back and read them and see what you guys are saying about the podcast when you absolutely love it. So thank you for doing that if you've already done that. Today we're going to talk about, you know what? Before we talk about today's topic, I also want to remind you guys, since this is going to be coming out on a Monday, that I am doing 2 free trainings, okay? 2 free webinars. One on July 14th and one on July 16th. And all you have to do to register for that is go to my website, macyrenee.com. Make sure you sign up for my email list, and I'm going to be sending out another email tomorrow with all the details on signing up for the webinar. So as soon as you listen to this, make sure that you go and subscribe to my email list at macyrenee.com at the very top as soon as you go to my website. And I will make sure that you get an email with all of the details so that you can join us, because I'm going to be training for free on money, and I'm also going to be training for free on some healing. So it's going to be called Heal. It's going to talk about how we get trapped in vicious cycles. Okay, so today what I wanted to talk about are triggers. I know that this word gets used quite a bit, and we'll say I'm triggered by this or I'm triggered by that. And so maybe, sometimes using that word so much it gets lost in like the actual meaning, but I want to really talk about triggers and why they're actually good for us. So being triggered, when I say that I am triggered, okay, and maybe some different people may have some different definitions, but this is my definition. When I say that I am triggered by something, I mean that I have a visceral response, meaning that my body actually has a reaction to something. Like I can feel my palms sweating. I can feel anxiety rushing through. I can feel myself beginning to shake. I can feel myself getting very hot, like heat hot, right? I might be able to feel my legs starting to quiver or my mouth becoming dry. So visceral is just like that body response that we get. And when I'm talking about becoming triggered by something, I mean you feel an emotional, energetic shift in your body. So you can actually feel the emotion that is coming up when someone says something, does something, when your senses are alerted, like maybe you've had an experience where you have a bad memory associated with a smell, and then 20 years later you smell that smell again and it just takes you right back, and you're like, oh my God, I feel triggered right now, because all of a sudden your subconscious is flooding you with memories of the past, something that happened 20 years ago, but it feels like it just happened yesterday because your body remembers what happened. Okay, so that's what I mean by being triggered by something. So I want to tell you guys that a lot of us are afraid of being triggered. We're really afraid of feeling what it feels like to be triggered because of that visceral response in our body. We don't like it. It's usually not comfortable. So we don't want to be triggered. But I have to tell you, in doing, I started therapy, like I was a client of therapy as young as first grade, so around 6 years old, and I'm almost 29. So I, have had a lot of experience with being the client sitting in a chair of many, many, many psychologists, counselors, psychiatrists, all of the things. And then I started being a client of life coaching in 2016. So 4 years of that. And in all of the work that I've done, inside of therapy, outside of therapy, personal development, listening to podcasts, reading the books, hiring life coaches, I have to tell you that the biggest breakthroughs that I have ever had have come from when I am highly triggered. When maybe a life coach says something that completely makes me go back to a past experience or a past memory or a past thought, or something that feels like an earthquake erupts inside of me. And it never feels good in the moment. But the thing about being triggered is that triggers will always tell you where you need to do the work, because our triggers are a huge indicator of the pieces that we have not healed. So when you feel triggered by something that someone says, something someone does, being in a certain environment, hearing a certain sound, smelling a certain smell, seeing something in particular, and you feel that visceral response come bubbling up, and you're ready to, a lot of times we get into fight or flight, like we're ready to flee. We do not like it. We feel very unsafe or uneasy about it, and we're ready to run. Those triggers are the most beneficial information for our self-awareness, because it's going to tell us exactly what we have in our subconscious that needs some healing and needs some work. So today I was hanging out with my grandma and two of her friends, and I don't even know how we got on this topic. Oh, my grandma was like, yeah, they know that I am a pediatric occupational therapist, but I have not worked since March with all of COVID. They're only allowing tele-intervention at this time, and I work with birth to 3-year-olds. And to be completely honest, most of my caseload was 2-year-olds, and a lot of the families didn't want to do tele-intervention. And if they did want to do tele-intervention, most 2-year-olds cannot even focus long enough to do a therapy session to where I felt it was morally worth billing for. I just felt like this feels very unethical, because I can spend 45 minutes to an hour talking to the parent, but I feel like we're not getting much done with the kiddo who's running around and the parents having to chase them. It just feels like a circus. So I have not worked my occupational therapy job since March, which has kind of been a blessing in disguise, because I've been able to fully dive into, one, all of my triggers, and two, dive into my coaching business and really treat this business full time. And when I'm not treating it full time, it's usually because I'm triggered. And so therefore I am leaning into a lot of uncomfortable work around believing that I can, and, getting through the mind drama, doing all of the hard inner work that is surrounded by going after your dreams, right? So this has been a very good time for me. But my grandma was saying, well, Macy is doing her life coaching and her two friends were there. We were having pizza together and they were like, what's life coaching? And so I was explaining to them what life coaches do. And I was essentially saying, a lot of times life coaches are helping to shine light on a lot of old thought patterns and beliefs and sometimes trauma, and they're helping you heal, and they're actually telling you how you are responsible for where you're at currently. Like, instead of, and again, this is coming from having years being in therapy pretty much my entire life up until life coaching, and even going to therapy back in February before COVID started. My experience with therapy has been, I sit and I tell them anything that's on my mind, and they ask me some questions and I reflect on it, and then we continue to talk about it. And they typically, in my therapy sessions, again, this is my experience, so this is not to say all therapy experiences, but in my experience, I normally don't get a lot of strategies or feel, especially now that I can compare it to life coaching, I don't usually feel responsible. I really feel like I'm able to stay in the place that I'm at and acknowledge my emotion and how that made me feel and feel supported in that emotion. But that's pretty much where I feel my therapy experiences have stopped. Like, I understand why you feel that way, and that makes sense of why that was traumatic for you, and that makes sense of why you were triggered. And maybe they'll ask me a few questions and I'll give them more detail, and then they'll ask me like how I'm doing with it, and I'll repeat myself. And then the next time that I go back, we pick up from where I left off. And at the end of my therapy sessions, I've always felt amazingly better because I was able to quote unquote word vomit everything that I was holding on to. It felt like I was able to release 1,000 pounds of stress and pressure. But the difference that I found now that I've worked with a life coach is that my life coaches have also held that space for me to feel what I'm feeling, and they will say, I understand why you feel that way, but do you see where you've played a part in perpetuating that situation, or where you've kept yourself in this cycle? Or do you understand why your brain is keeping you there? Or do you understand how your brain works so that you can understand why this feels so painful? And I think that is ultimately the difference in my life coaching experiences that I've had versus my therapy sessions, is that my life coaches have really tried to help me understand the way that the brain works and why I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling, and how to really change that and take my power back. And instead of holding on to these stories that every time I bring them up again, it feels like, oh my God, I'm bringing it up again and I'm triggered by it and I don't really know how to work through it other than talking about it. Life coaches are like, as many times as you talk about it, you're likely going to be triggered. What is the action you're going to do to change that thought, to change that action, to change that result, to change that feeling? And that's been very empowering for me. Again, everybody's situation could be different. And I love both the field of therapy and coaching. I have nothing against therapy. I support people who say, if they say they're going to go to therapy, I support them 1,000%. Therapy saved me so many times. I was never suicidal, but I definitely had moments where I'm like, what is life? Like, seriously, what is the purpose and what is the point? And, I have so much trauma to work through. I really need someone to hear me and support me. And therapy did just that. When it came time to find my voice and my power and my strength and how to actually create the life that I wanted, not just talk about it, but really create it, life coaching helped me do that. And so anyways, today we were talking about the difference between, life coaching, and I was explaining to them what it was. And we really got to talking about how being triggered is such a good thing, because when we're triggered, we can see where our trauma has really stamped us in a permanent way. And only when we have the awareness of how we're triggered and why we're triggered can we actually work on it. So this was the example that I gave them in this conversation. I said, one of the people in my life that I was around quite a bit as I was growing up had very abusive tones and very abusive language. And this person and I didn't have the greatest relationship. And at the end of every insult towards someone else that, like I would be in the same room and they would have very insulting, abusive tones and language. And so I already felt uncomfortable and uneasy because I knew that it wasn't right and it didn't feel good to me energetically. But I was a child, and so I couldn't always escape that situation. And at the end of every insult, they would kind of do this laugh, like a kind of laugh. And as a kid, it got under my skin because every time they do this laugh, it was always in this sarcastic, condescending tone. And I hated it. When I tell you it got under my skin, I just can't even tell you. Like, it really, truly got under my skin. And I knew that it got under my skin as a kid, but I never worked on healing it because you don't really think of it being a big deal. It's just kind of like, yeah, that's a little, tick that they have that's very annoying and I don't even like to hear about it, but whatever, Well, the thing about our triggers is that if we don't heal them, every time they come up, we'll be triggered by it. And it's kind of like trauma. If we don't heal our trauma is going to come back and it's going to follow you around and it's going to impact your future relationships with other people. If you don't heal your trauma, it's going to come back. I promise you 1,000%. That is a really big part of healing, whether you're doing it in therapy or life coaching, is that you're healing your triggers, you're healing your traumas. And the triggers are the indicator for what needs healing. So what I mean by this is whenever my husband and I, at the time we were dating, when there was one time in particular, he told this story and it was just like a random story and it was a funny story. But at the end of this story, he did the sound. You guys, I lost my mind. When I tell you it, the visceral response in my body, I was so triggered. I internally was shaking. I was infuriated. I was angry. My brain immediately went to thoughts of, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can be in a relationship with this person. This person, like maybe they have the exact same traits as the person that was abusive in my childhood. I can't do this. I can't do this. And my body had this response. Now, my logical brain could, look at it and say, okay, he didn't actually say anything bad. This was a joking story. Like, he just made a sound. And that sound was similar to bad situations in the past. So all of a sudden my brain considered him in that moment a bad apple. It was like alarms were going off in my brain. Like, oh my God, how could I possibly be with this person? Like, they're going to trigger me all the time. And it was like my inner child came out screaming and I was super, super triggered by it. And what it taught me was that I had not faced the trauma that I had associated with that sound. And I had not done the work to really forgive and separate the fact that just because he had a similar laugh at the end of a joke or story didn't mean that he was this horrible person the way that I had associated, him in my mind in that moment because of past trauma triggered experiences. And that's what we do. And this is why looking at our triggers is so very important, because if you don't closely look at why you're triggered to understand it, it's going to follow you into situations that can be very innocent, and you could end up sabotaging something that is really good because you haven't healed your previous traumas, your previous triggers. Does that make sense? It's very important to look at that and to understand that and to really lean into every time you're triggered. When you get annoyed with someone and when you feel frustrated with someone and, when someone says something and you're like, oh my God, that made me so mad. Instead of having the reaction, I'm ready to punch them in the face because that made me so mad. It's like, why did that make you so mad? A lot of us adults don't even know how to identify the feeling that we're feeling or why we're even feeling it, let alone look into it and lean into it more and say, oh my gosh, I'm triggered because of this. So another way that I was triggered, I think I've shared this story on the podcast, maybe even recently, so I won't go into it, but it was all about not being invited to a dinner. I wasn't invited to a dinner and I was super triggered by it. I saw the pictures on Facebook. I was absolutely agitated, heartbroken, and I had enough of personal development and life coaching to know that even though I was triggered by not being invited to dinner, it couldn't have just been about the dinner. There was something deeper than that. And when I explored that deeper, I was able to recognize that the core feeling in my body was not being wanted, like feeling like I was not wanted. And it was the feeling of being not wanted that was disguised in this overall thing of, oh, I wasn't invited to dinner. I'm so mad at them. I don't want to talk to them anymore. And knowing like, I cannot possibly be this upset over not being invited to dinner. There's something underneath that. And when I was able to lean into the feeling of, why do I feel like I'm unwanted? I was able to trace that back to childhood, again, trauma that hadn't been healed, and realize that was why I was triggered as an adult, because it triggered a piece of me that I had not healed from childhood that was very, very painful. So the next time that you're triggered, what I encourage you to do is just sit with that and use your adult mind to say, I'm very triggered right now. Why? Why am I so triggered by that? Why do I feel hurt by that and upset by that? And how can I lean into that negative emotion, and rather than having the response of, I can't stand them, or I want to punch them, or, this very like teenager response, just sit with your inner child and say, why were we triggered and how are we actually feeling in this moment? And it can be such a huge indicator as to some work that you can do to heal yourself. And healing is probably the most important work we could ever do. Like, until we heal ourselves, we can't expect a healed, cohesive world where we're all getting along. If we're all not looking at our triggers and we're all not looking at our own stuff, we really can't expect us as a collective to come together. We have to be willing to heal ourselves first. So that is your work, is work on healing yourself first. Work on identifying your triggers. Work on why you're feeling that way. What emotions are coming up? Trace it back to your childhood. Why do you feel that way? And I guarantee it will help you so much. So I love you guys, and I will talk to you next time. Be sure, if you want to join me on the free webinars, that you go to MacyRenee.com, sign up for my email list, and check your spam box and your regular email for my email going out with the details of how to register for the webinars. Hey girl, did you know there's a place for you to continue this work outside of the podcast? Well, there is, and it's called Becoming Her. This is my online and ongoing coaching container for self-mastery. Everything takes place online and is the best value for your investment if you're wanting to work with me. This is for women that want to create lasting change by learning how to master themselves, their energy, their mindset, and how to do the deep inner work. It's a growing community where you're supported for life, with live online trainings, access to all previously recorded content, and 2 one-on-one coaching calls with me per month. It's an investment where you can rest assured you'll have everything you need at your fingertips, and where there's one primary goal: becoming your highest self. If this has been something you're looking for, join us and be a part of the growth. You can find out more information on MacyRenee.com.